My stepson smashed my retirement party cake off the table while laughing. Whoops, table wobbled. Without saying a word, I picked up his fiance's diamond tennis bracelet worth $38,000 and dropped it straight into the bonfire. But the real betrayal was only beginning to surface. The diamonds didn't melt. They just went black with smoke one by one, until the whole bracelet looked like a strip of burnt sugar. I stood at the edge of the fire pit and watched it happen. That bracelet Priscilla wore to every single family gathering, holding her wrist up under the light whenever she thought someone wasn't looking directly at her, making sure the conversation eventually circled back to where it came from. The coals beneath it glowed steady, the smoke coming off the velvet pouch she'd left it sitting in turned from white to gray to something with a faint chemical bite that made my neighbor step back without seeming to notice she'd done it. Behind me, the backyard had gone completely silent. Not shock silence, not the gasp then whisper kind. This was the particular quiet of people watching something they'd quietly hoped for finally happen, and not quite believing it had. Priscilla's scream cracked it open. My bracelet! Garrett, do something! She's completely unhinged. My stepson crossed the yard in 5 steps. His face had gone the color of the tablecloth pooled in the grass. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. He looked at the fire, then at me, then back at the fire, the specific back and forth of someone watching an accident in slow motion, trying to find the exact moment he could have stopped it. Linda, do you have any idea what that's worth? I looked at him for a long moment, long enough to let everything inside me settle into something that wasn't rage, wasn't grief, wasn't the tremor I was working hard to keep out of my hands. Whoops, I said. Table wobbled. The backyard stayed silent. That was the beginning of the end, just not the end I expected. My name is Linda Faraday. I am 66 years old. I spent 24 years building a life with my husband Carl, first as his wife, then, after his first wife died when his son Garrett was 9, as the only mother that boy really remembers having. I raised Garrett in this house, on this half-acre lot outside Tulsa, where the same families have lived since before I arrived, and the woman across the street still brings me a casserole every time someone in town has a hard month, because she remembers I once sat with her through one of her own. Carl was an HVAC contractor. He wired the whole house himself, fought the inspector for 2 days about the breaker panel, and laid the back patio with his own hands because he didn't trust anyone else to get the pitch right for drainage. He was correct. 24 years later, that patio has never pooled a single drop of water in the wrong spot. He died of a sudden cardiac event 2 years ago, on a Sunday morning in May, which I've come to think is a cruel month to lose someone, because the whole world is blooming while you're trying to remember how to breathe. We had 26 years together, counting from our wedding. I cleaned out his workshop alone on a Saturday, slowly, organizing his tools exactly the way he always kept them, because rushing it felt like losing him twice, and asking for help with something that private felt impossible. Garrett was 33 when his father died. He'd been living across town, working in commercial real estate, calling most Sundays. After Carl passed, he started coming for dinner once a week, sometimes twice. He'd sit at the kitchen table and eat my food, and we'd talk about his dad, about the neighborhood, about whatever had happened that week. I was grateful. I thought we were holding each other up the way family is supposed to. 11 months ago, he called to tell me he and Priscilla were engaged, and that they needed to move in with me for a few months while they saved for a down payment on a house of their own. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone and said, of course, because I raised that boy from the age of 9, because Carl would have said the exact same thing without a second of hesitation, because that is precisely what you build a family for. A few months had now stretched to 11. Priscilla arrived with a moving truck full of designer furniture she insisted on keeping in storage for the right house, 6 suitcases for everyday use, and a presence that filled every room she entered the way perfume does. You didn't notice it had settled in until you were already breathing through it. She was charming at first. She brought a bottle of good wine the first weekend, called me Miss Linda, with what seemed like genuine warmth, and asked thoughtful questions about the town with her head tilted, eyes moving across my living room in a way I read, at the time, as appreciation. I thought, this could actually be fine. Maybe I've forgotten what it's like to have other people in the house. Maybe I've grown too particular about my own space. The first thing she changed was the gallery wall in the hallway. Mine held 20 years of family photographs, Garrett's school pictures, Carl and me at our anniversary dinners, snapshots from camping trips. I came down one morning, 12 days after they'd moved in, to find half of it bare. The photographs were stacked on the hall table in a neat pile, replaced by 3 large abstract prints still wrapped in plastic at the corners. Hope that's all right, Priscilla said from the kitchen island, not looking up from her phone. The hallway felt really cluttered. Garrett agreed it needed a refresh. I looked at the new prints. Then I looked at the spot where Carl's and my anniversary photo used to hang dead center, the one from our 20th, where we're both laughing at something off camera. It was gone from the wall entirely. Where's the anniversary photo? I asked. Boxed it up in the hall closet. It was making the space feel a little funeral home, if I'm honest. She took a sip of her coffee. You'll like the new prints. Much more modern. That was the first moment I felt it clearly. Not anger exactly. Something colder, more precise. The recognition that this woman was operating on a logic entirely her own, with no intention of asking my opinion before applying it to my home. I told myself, it's her space too for now. She's settling in. Be patient. I should have stopped telling myself that much sooner than I did. Over the following 6 months, my house slowly became somebody else's house. My collection of cookbooks, 30 years of stained, dog-eared, handwritten note-filled volumes, including 3 that had belonged to my own mother, disappeared from the kitchen shelf one Tuesday while I was at church. I found them in a box in the garage, taped shut, stacked beside the holiday decorations. When I mentioned it that evening, Garrett looked at his plate and said, Priscilla thought the kitchen needed to look more streamlined. There wasn't really room for all of it. There's been room for 30 years. I said. He didn't answer. The boxed anniversary photo migrated from the hall closet to the garage, and then, 1 week in late spring, to a spot under a tarp near the lawn equipment. When I confronted Priscilla about it directly, she arranged her face into something gentle and concerned, and explained she'd been doing a decluttering pass because she found too many personal mementos emotionally heavy in shared spaces. She said it the way people say things they've rehearsed. Smooth, confident, and then went back to her phone. She told Garrett my cooking was a little outdated for his system these days. Not once, repeatedly. At the table, in front of me, with a small wince she'd flash and withdraw quickly, as if she was simply being honest, as if honesty were a kindness she was extending to me. She told him I drove too slowly when we ran errands together, that I told the same neighborhood stories too often, that my evenings on the porch with my tea weren't really conducive to anyone else using the space. He relayed all of this to me as gentle suggestions. Priscilla was just saying maybe. I kept waiting for him to add, but I told her that's not how we talk about you in this house. He never did. There is a particular kind of erosion that happens slowly, one small thing at a time. A cookbook here, a photograph there, a comment over breakfast, and it does something different to a person than a single blow does. You can recover from a blow. This other thing works the way water works on stone, patient, persistent, entirely indifferent to your resistance. I started to wonder if I was being unreasonable, if Priscilla's quiet concern about my difficulty adjusting, which she voiced to Garrett privately, but which always somehow found its way to me, was, in some measure, fair. I started to wonder. I think that was exactly the point. The retirement party was my friend Doreen's idea. I'd worked 31 years as a hospital billing supervisor, and my last day had finally come. Doreen is 71, blunt to the point of being structurally incapable of subtlety, and constitutionally unable to watch someone she loves get slowly worn down without saying something direct about it. When I told her in late August about the cookbooks and the photo and the comments at dinner, she went quiet for nearly 5 seconds and then said, Linda, that girl is sanding you down, and Garrett is holding the paper. You don't know that for certain, I said, still trying to be fair. I know it exactly, and so do you, if you'd stop pretending otherwise. She insisted on throwing me a small retirement party in my own backyard. 6 of us. Doreen, my old coworker Sandra, my neighbor Pat, and the kids. My backyard, my retirement, an evening that should have meant I could simply exist comfortably in a space that was mine. I want to be clear about what happened. I was not provoking anyone. I was sitting at my own table, in chairs arranged on the patio Carl had poured himself, eating cake I'd ordered, surrounded by people who'd shown up for me. Garrett came outside around 8:15, already a little loose from the beers he'd been having since the afternoon, in the way that always made him careless rather than cruel on purpose, which somehow made what happened worse. Not better. He stopped near the cake table, white frosting. Congratulations, Linda, piped across the top in blue. He looked at it swaying slightly and grinned at me. Bet this costs less than Priscilla's manicure, he said, loud enough for the whole table to hear, laughing at his own joke before anyone else had a chance to react. Doreen made a low sound in her throat. Sandra's face went still. Garrett reached for a beer on the same table and his elbow caught the cake stand on the way past. It went over. The cake hit the patio with a sound louder than I expected. Frosting smeared across the concrete Carl had poured and finished himself one autumn decades ago. The candles scattered into the grass. Nobody moved. Garrett straightened up, looked at the mess with the loose, unbothered amusement of someone who'd already decided it wasn't a big deal. Whoops, he said. Table wobbled. My husband's son, standing in my backyard at my retirement party, laughing. I am 66 years old. I have given a eulogy. I have cleaned out a dead man's workshop alone. I have raised another woman's child as my own for 24 years. I know exactly what it costs to hold yourself together when every part of you wants to come apart. I stood still for 3 seconds. I counted them silently. Then I walked over to the velvet pouch sitting on the chair where Priscilla had set it down earlier, the tennis bracelet inside it, taken off because it kept catching on things. I picked it up. I crossed the yard in 11 steps. I stood at the edge of the fire pit Carl had built into the patio for evenings exactly like this one was supposed to be. I dropped it in. The shouting started immediately. Priscilla's voice climbed to a register I had genuinely never heard from another adult. Raw, disbelieving. Garrett rushed toward the fire pit, then stopped, then looked at his fiancée, then looked at me. The velvet pouch had already caught, the diamonds inside going dark with soot. My bracelet, she's lost it completely. Garrett, do something. Linda! His voice cracked on the word in a way I recognized from when he was 9 years old and had broken something of his father's. Linda, that's worth more than your car. Whoops, I said, for the second time that evening. Table wobbled. The yard was silent. Not the earlier laughing silence, the one that had let 6 adults sit frozen while Garrett knocked my retirement cake to the ground. This silence was different. I felt it shift in the air. Doreen looked at me across the yard with an expression I intend to remember for the rest of my life. My guests left carefully, squeezing my hand on their way past. Doreen was last out. She held both my hands and said nothing for a moment. Then, call me tonight if you need to. Then she left. Priscilla was on her phone before the gate had even closed. That night, I lay in bed and listened to the house settle the way old houses do, creaking, exhaling, and I heard Priscilla in the hallway outside my door. Her voice was low. She believed I was asleep. If we get her to sign over the house now, before she does anything else crazy, we sell it and split the proceeds with your dad's life insurance payout too. The longer we wait, the more she might try to spend down. I didn't move. I breathed slowly. In, out. We tell her it's for her own good, she continued, that after tonight anyone would understand. We just need Garrett to actually say something to her instead of just standing there. A pause. Garrett's voice lower, something I couldn't make out clearly. Then Priscilla again. She burned $38,000 in front of 6 witnesses tonight, Garrett. Any judge would look at that and ask questions. We just need to document it properly. I lay in the dark and let those words settle into the shape they actually were, and I understood something I'd been circling for months without quite landing on it. Garrett had not simply failed to defend me. He had let himself become part of something. I raised that boy. I sat up with him through fevers, drove him to baseball practice for a decade, stood in this exact kitchen helping him with homework his own mother never got the chance to help with, and he had stood in my backyard at my retirement party and laughed while his fiance's bracelet, bought, I'd learn later, partly with money drawn from an account that still had my name attached to it from years earlier, burned in a fire I'd lit myself, and he had said nothing while it happened, and now he was in the hallway agreeing to take my house. I lay still until I heard their door close. Then I got up, went to the kitchen, and made a list. I was at the bank when it opened at 9 a.m. After Carl died, Garrett had been added to one of my accounts years earlier, back when he was helping manage things during Carl's final illness. I had never removed him. That is the sentence I kept returning to over the following days. I never removed him, and I kept having to decide whether that oversight had simply been negligence on my part or whether it had quietly been exploited. The teller, a young man named Desmond, had careful eyes and the manner of someone used to delivering bad news gently. I asked him to print every statement from the joint account for the past 2 years. I sat in the chair near the window and went through them line by line. A jewelry store. The tennis bracelet purchased itself $38,400. Charged 8 months ago. A furniture storage facility monthly for the items Priscilla insisted on keeping for the right house. Restaurant charges, steady and frequent. Withdrawal after withdrawal, each kept just under the threshold that would have triggered an automatic alert. $155,000. My savings. Part of Carl's life insurance payout moved into that account years ago because at the time, having Garrett as a backup signer felt like simple, sensible planning. My hands were shaking. My voice was not. I'd like this account closed today, I told Desmond. Everything remaining transferred into a new account in my name only. Remove every other authorized signer immediately. Ma'am, he said carefully, the other account holder will receive a notification when I understand completely. I said. Close it anyway. He closed it. Garrett called at 1:50 p.m. I know the time because I wrote it down. Linda, my card got declined buying gas. What did you do? I closed the account. You, after everything. No, I said. I just stopped paying for a bracelet that's currently in my fire pit. He was still talking when I set the phone down. I stood at my kitchen window and looked out at the yard for a long while. The pecan tree Carl had planted the year we married was still standing, still throwing the same wide shade across the back half of the lot. I thought about the afternoon we'd planted it together, him digging while I argued about depth, both of us certain we were right. Then I called Doreen. Then I called a lawyer. Attorney Rebecca Solis had practiced family and estate law in Tulsa for 20 years. Her office sat above a coffee shop downtown, a hardy little cactus on the windowsill, and a degree from the State University behind her desk. She shook my hand, offered me coffee, and sat across from me with a legal pad. And I told her everything. The account, the withdrawals, the timeline, what I'd overheard through the door, the plan Priscilla had described, the house, the life insurance, the documentation they intended to build against me. I laid the bank statements across her desk in chronological order. Rebecca read through them without speaking, making small, precise notes in the margins. $155,000. She said, not as a question. Yes, your stepson is the secondary account holder, added years ago and never removed. The spending pattern tracks almost entirely with purchases for his fiancé. I know, I said. I also have a recording. She looked up. I told her about the small recorder I'd left on the hallway bookshelf, because after lying awake until nearly dawn, I decided that words I couldn't prove had happened might as well not have happened. Rebecca listened to the recording twice. On the second pass, she made 3 separate notes. When she set it down, she was quiet for a moment. Oklahoma's one-party consent laws on your own property work in in your favor here, she said. Combined with the financial records, this is a substantial documentary case. She folded her hands. Linda, what you've described could support a civil claim for financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and the plan you overheard, using fabricated evidence of incapacity to pressure a property transfer, is a serious aggravating factor, regardless of whether Garrett is your biological son. Step relationships don't exempt anyone from these statutes. She paused. I want to bring in a colleague who handles this specifically. Whatever it takes, I said. Over the following 5 days, with Rebecca's office, a notary downtown, and a bank manager named Otis who understood immediately what I was describing, I built a wall. A legal trust was established, placing the house and remaining savings into a structure managed by Rebecca and my friend Doreen as co-trustees. The house could not be sold, mortgaged, or transferred without written consent from both. Any power of attorney, regardless of who signed it, would carry no legal weight against the trust. The document ran 34 pages. I signed every page in blue ink. The complaint to the county's Adult Protective Services unit came next. An investigator named Carol Whitfield reviewed the bank statements, listened to the recording, and confirmed within 3 weeks that the spending pattern, combined with the recorded conversation, constituted sufficient grounds for a formal financial exploitation referral. You're remarkably calm about all this, she told me. I know exactly what I have, I said. I just want it documented. I want it to follow them. She wrote that down too. On a Saturday morning, 10 days after the retirement party, I came downstairs to find Garrett and Priscilla at the kitchen table. A document sat centered between them. Linda, Garrett said, his voice carrying that careful, rehearsed softness. Sit down with us. We're worried about you. I sat. The bracelet thing, Priscilla started, combined with some other things we've noticed. I know about the account, I said. All $155,000. I know what you said in the hallway 10 nights ago. I watched Garrett's jaw tighten. There's a legal trust now. This house, my savings, all of it. My attorney and Doreen are co-trustees. Your names are on nothing. The color left Garrett's face slowly, like water draining. You can't do that, Priscilla said. It's his inheritance. It's my house, I said, that I built a life inside for 24 years, raising a boy who isn't speaking up for me right now, while his fiancé argues about my own property in front of me. I looked at Garrett directly. Your father would have said something by now. You know that. He didn't answer. My attorney's card is by the phone, I said, and an investigator from Adult Protective Services will be reaching out Monday. I'd like you both out by the end of the month. I stood up, went to the garage, and pulled the tarp back from the box that held my anniversary photo. I carried it inside and hung it back in the center of the hallway wall, exactly where it had always been. Then I went to the kitchen, took down one of my mother's old cookbooks from the box Garrett had never bothered to put back, and set it on the counter. I made myself coffee. I drank it warm, in my own kitchen, in my own house. 4 months later, the Adult Protective Services referral moved forward. The bank account audit confirmed several purchases had been made while Garrett was at work, with no corroborating authorization from him at all, meaning the bulk of the spending traced back to Priscilla alone, using access she should never have had. Garrett has called me twice since they moved out. I answered both times. We talked for a few minutes. I don't know yet what we are to each other now. Doreen brought me a pie last month. No occasion, just because. We ate it on the back patio, at the table where the cake had hit the ground weeks earlier. The cookbooks are all back on the shelf. Carl's and my anniversary photo is back where it belongs. Most evenings, I sit with my coffee on that patio he poured with his own hands, and I tell him what's been happening, and I tell him the house is still ours. It is still ours. That's enough.